A lot of words can be used to describe the Mr. McMahon character. Hilarious, outrageous, exaggerated, powerful, grapefruits, and so on. One word that quickly comes to mind when Vince's on-screen alter ego is playing the heel is evil. The Mac Daddy was an absolute tyrant when he wanted to be, which was often, and made life hell for those in the locker room as well as his own family. The elderly, the disabled, even God himself, nobody was safe when it came to Mr. McMahon and his wicked ways. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most evil Vince McMahon WWE moments. Join us. Number 10. Shaving Eugene's head. When you're building up to a hair versus hair match, traditionally you need to show at least a glimpse of the stipulation's consequences beforehand. When Mr. McMahon was gearing up for a Battle of the Billionaires showdown with Donald Trump, it was plainly obvious that one unfortunate superstar was going to be booked in for a televised trim. And who better than the sympathetic Eugene, the pro wrestling savant who had previously been a thorn in the side of the McMahons during their dispute with DX. When Eric Bischoff's bumbling nephew accidentally spilled a cup of coffee on Vince's suit backstage, the chairman responded by booking him in a match with his WrestleMania representative, Umaga. Once the Samoan bulldozer had, bulldozed his way through Eugene, McMahon had him strapped to a barber's chair and choked out by Umaga. While the buzz cut was in progress, McMahon took time to taunt Eugene and slap him across the face before ordering Umaga to spin him around and dump him to the ground as he lay prone and helpless. Despicable. Number 9. Making Trish Stratus bark like a dog. It's been over 2 decades since this infamous segment went down, live on Raw, and even with time and perspective, I'm still far from figuring out just what the hell it was really all about. Vince had been having an affair with Trish Stratus for a couple of months, right in the face of his catatonic wife Linda. More on that in a bit. Naturally, this led to a feud between Trish and Stephanie McMahon, during which the genetic jackhammer's opinion of Miss Stratus seemed to change. After being humiliated the week before by her sugar daddy, Steph, and William Regal by having the contents of a filthy mop bucket dumped all over her, Trish begged for forgiveness, only to have a vindictive Vince make her earn it by barking like a dog and then stripping down to her underwear. McMahon was at his absolute slimiest here and was very effective in his performance, but the prospect of seeing Stratus in her birthday suit only had the horny Attitude Era fans in attendance cheering the whole charade on. Vince wasn't cheering years later on when the segment was used by his wife's political opponents in her bid for a seat in the US Senate. Oops. Number 8. Mocking Zach Gowen. Mr. McMahon was perhaps at his most deranged in 2003 as he attempted to end Hulkamania, beat up his own daughter, and completely lost the plot in his pursuit of burying The Undertaker alive. That summer, Vince found himself in the unlikely scenario of butting heads with Zach Gowen, the Hulkster superfan cum wrestler who had had his left leg amputated while battling cancer as a child. A one-legged so-called charity case was a prime target for Mr. McMahon, and he reeled off the insults with glee. Branding the inspirational Gowen a freak, Vince looked like he was having the time of his life making fun of his impediments, mimicking him by walking around the ring with an exaggerated limp after cheating to beat Zack in an arm wrestling contest. Vince eventually beat Gowen in their grudge match at Vengeance, but he wasn't done tormenting the one-legged wonder. Months later, he encouraged Brock Lesnar to attack Gowen, who was still recovering from the first time he encountered the next big thing. In Vince's defense, even he looked a tad remorseful after witnessing just how far Brock went on that occasion. Number 7. Having his wife committed. As we talked about before, one of the big storylines of early 2001 was Vince's illicit affair with Trish Stratus and all the drama that came with it. McMahon was able to carry out his dalliance willy-nilly, in part because his long-suffering wife Linda had been sent into a catatonic state after her hubby had dropped the divorce bombshell on her. As the whole psychodrama played out in front of a global television audience, Linda's condition deteriorated. Confined to a wheelchair and unable to emote, WWE COO was over-medicated and out of the picture so that her life partner could sow his seeds at will, making out with his hot blonde plaything while Linda looked on, unable to intervene. To be fair, it was the role Linda was born to play. I mean, she wasn't exactly Meryl Streep when it came to the whole acting thing, was she? At one stage, Vince had his wife committed to a sanatorium in order to properly get her out of the way. Thankfully though, Linda had the last laugh when she rose to her feet and kicked Vince in his notoriously enlarged grapefruit fruits at WrestleMania X7. Number 6, beating up Hornswoggle. When it was revealed that Vince McMahon's illegitimate son was none other than Hornswoggle, obviously, the WWE chairman was, it's fair to say, less than pleased. Embarrassed by the revelation, Vince decided to teach the little fella some tough love by booking him in matches against far larger opponents such as the Great Khali. After Finlay intervened and battered the boss, McMahon booked himself against the little bastard in a steel cage match. And this was where the worm turned, the worm in this case being Mr. McMahon. The match wasn't really a match, but a setup all along as John Bradshaw Layfield entered the fray and helped Vince handcuff Finlay to the ropes before beating him down. McMahon then took his belt to Hornswoggle before leaving him at the mercy of JBL. And you can probably guess how it went from there, with the tall Texan treating the leprechaun like he was some kind of rookie who had unknowingly moved his bag in the locker room. The beatdown was long and violent, orchestrated by Mr. McMahon, who watched on from ringside while feigning concern. Number 5, orchestrating his daughter's kidnapping. Look, we've all orchestrated our daughter's kidnapping at one point or another, haven't we? I mean, obviously we haven't. I don't even have a daughter, and if I did, I don't think I would orchestrate her kidnapping, or at least I hope I wouldn't. And I guess that's what separates me from Mr. McMahon, who had Stephanie abducted by The Undertaker as part of the whole Ministry of Darkness saga. The $1 Billion Princess was actually kidnapped twice, the first time being found by Ken Shamrock in a basement after Vince sent the world's most dangerous man to look for her, and the second with Taker trying to marry her while tied to a crucifix. Whoa, sorry. I meant tied to the Ministry's religious symbol. Vince looked distraught while his poor innocent young girl was being tormented by the dead man, but the reveal that Vince himself was the mysterious higher power meant that he was in fact the one who set the whole thing up. So angry at this act of evil was Steph and Linda that they gave their combined 50% share of the company to Vince's primary nemesis, Steve Austin. Number 4, beating up his own daughter. The kidnapping thing was bad, granted, but it's still a far cry from Vince actually, physically assaulting his second-born. He'd spent years kicking the crap out of Shane, but it took him until No Mercy 2003 before he squared off with Steph in the first ever daddy-daughter I Quit match. Can't believe that hadn't been done before. Anyway, the CEO was annoyed at the then SmackDown general manager for supporting his rivals Hulk Hogan and Zach Gowen, as well as her objections to him having another affair with a busty blonde a fraction of his age. God, daughters can be such a nag, can't they? Their match made for, to put it mildly, uncomfortable viewing. Vince did not hold back when it came back to fighting his own flesh and blood, willingly smacking her, slamming her, stretching her, and even attempting to choke her out with a lead pipe. Steph gave as good as she got, but was no match for her jacked-up daddy. Linda, who had been forced to watch this sanctioned intergender child abuse, was forced to throw in the towel in order to stop the madness. Number 3, the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club. After vanquishing the Alliance and winning the invasion in late 2001, Mr. McMahon felt even more indestructible than usual. Drunk on power and firmly back in the heel camp, Mr. McMahon began lashing out at those who he believed had wronged him and created the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club as a means to make them pay. Now, the sight of a 50-year-old Vince McMahon parading around with his trousers around his ankles and asking people to pucker up and plant one on his backside was, objectively, very funny. But from a kayfabe perspective, it was undeniably evil, especially when he did it to Jim Ross in his native Oklahoma, naturally, and tried to get Trish to join in as if she hadn't already been through enough McMahon trauma for one lifetime. The club was temporarily closed when The Rock introduced the boss to Rikishi's cornhole, but you cannot keep a good bastard down, and Vince would revive the concept right up until WWE went PG. Shawn Michaels, Marty Jannetty, Hornswoggle, Mick Foley, Zach Gowen, Steve Austin, Eric Bischoff, Triple H, all either joined or were almost inducted to this most degrading of clubs. Number 2, the Church of Mcmanism. The church, well, hell, all religion, has long been a source of material for WWE, and there have been plenty of characters, angles, and storylines that deal with matters of faith. Mr. McMahon personally began to have an issue with the Almighty during his feud with Shawn Michaels in 2000. 2006. Vince started off by ripping on the born-again Heartbreak Kid's belief, deriding his savior and religious lifestyle. After Michaels had him leaving the arena on a stretcher following their meeting at WrestleMania 22, McMahon doubled down on his god-bashing ways. Seeking to push his rival's buttons, Vince took countless cheap shots at the Heavenly Father and even likened himself to the Supreme Being during a trip to church with Shane. While God may have created Adam and Eve, Mr. McMahon had created Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin and didn't even need to take Sundays off. He even went so far as to tempt the man upstairs to strike him down if he was telling porkies. Coining his own religion, McMahonism, Vince escalated the blasphemy and inserted himself into historic religious images, for a laugh. In the end, Vince McMahon went over on Michaels and God at Backlash. Number 1, mocking Jim Ross's colon surgery. Vince McMahon seriously put his lead commentator and one-time talent relations chief Jim Ross through the ringer both on-screen and off. Good old JR often accepted his fate, believing he was being put in unfavorable and often demeaning situations, typically in his beloved Sooner state, because he was a sympathetic babyface being used to help get heels over. There's a grain of truth to that when it comes to stuff like The Undertaker turning heel and shoving his face in Vince's backside, or the dastardly Triple H beating him to a pulp in MSG, but there is simply no excusing the hideous Dr. Heine segment. After being fired from play-by-play duty by Linda McMahon, Ross took some time off from WWE in order to get colon surgery after doctors had discovered a potentially life-threatening issue. 2 weeks after Linda booted him in the balls, Vince McMahon unleashed Dr. Heine on the world. A dreadfully unfunny skit that saw McMahon's on-air character pull various items from a dummy made up to look like the man in the black hat. It was played for laughs, but just came across as brutally vindictive given the nature of JR's real-life health situation at the time.